Welcome back to Prep Station Economics. In this session, we'll be talking about public finance. By the way, I need to ask you, did you vote in the last election? Or maybe you did, maybe you didn't. Doesn't really matter. But who did you pick? Well, whoever you picked, whether the person won or not, the person has just one job: to make Nigeria better. And that's what we deal with in economics, public finance. Now, public finance is talking about how the government's actions affect you and I, affect the economy, affect our GDP, affect employment level, affect price level as well. So that's what public finance is talking about, what government does. And governments have many things they do, and in terms of this, we call it fiscal policy. For fiscal policy, there are two major instruments of fiscal policy: taxation and government spending. Or you can call it government revenue, or you can simply call it budget. But to me, I would just say taxation and budget. So, of course, you must have heard that the government have racked up a budget every year. After every fiscal year, government has a budget for the country. I don't know what the last one is like, or the value is, but it's going to be in billions or in trillions. Maybe if not in dollars anyway. So now let's talk about public finance. The first part is budget. Now, what is a budget? Of course, you've once had a birthday party and you've once had an event you have to do, and somebody told you have a budget for it. Or there's a time you want to go shopping, somebody asks you, do you have a budget for it? What the person is asking you is, do you have an estimate of all the income, of all the spending you will do in that space? How much money are you willing to spend within that period of time? That's what budget simply means. So a budget is a forecast, or it's simply an estimate of government spending, because we're dealing with governments here, not dealing with your pocket. You are microeconomics, we're dealing with macroeconomics now. So which means that how much does government intend to spend this year? How much does government intend to generate from revenues this year? Government makes money. We all know that. Government sells crude oil on our behalf because the resources belong to all of us. But government makes the money. Government spearhead the business. Government also have to spend money on building roads, spend money on employing or paying salaries of workers. Government have to build more schools. Government have to pay for our defense. So all these things are government spending. So the question is, how should government spend its money? And how does that affect people in society? Imagine government spending money and it's affecting you in your own home. Yes, it does. So let's talk about this again. So what's the budget? Budget is the estimate, right? Now, but why do you need a budget? As an individual, you need a budget because you want to make sure you don't spend too much. You want to make sure that you have a plan or a goal to achieve. For example, let's say you're having a birthday party and somebody asks you, how much is the budget for your birthday party? And you say it's about 5 million. Of course, we all know you are trying to impress your friends, or you're trying to maybe impress someone, or make yourself very popular on social media by spending so much money on your birthday. That's your aim. The same thing with the government. The government also spends money because they have an aim. The aim might be to increase employment by building more schools or creating more jobs. The aim might be to provide infrastructure so that we can have more businesses. The aim might be to just maybe offset some previous debts. So government have many reasons why they spend money, or why they even make up a budget. And just like you said, you don't want to overspend. The government also does not want to overspend. But when the government overspends, there's a consequence. One of those consequences could be inflation. One of them could be more money in circulation. One of them could be even crowding out private investments. Because if government keeps doing some things, the private sector might not be able to do those things. So there are many reasons why government want to have a budget. So we've talked about three things. One, tracking your revenue. Two, tracking your expenses. And number three, having a goal at the back of your mind. A target, something you want to achieve. Okay, so we understand this. The question is, what are the types of budgets? Because budgets have different types. Of course, you would have, let's not talk about you anymore, let's talk about the government at this moment. So what kind of budget does the government want to run? Government could run two types of budgets. Number one is a balanced budget. Now, a balanced budget is a kind of budget that allows you to spend exactly how much you generate. Oh, that makes sense, right? But not in all cases. It might be a good idea, but in economics, we're not talking about what is good. We're talking about what is efficient, what is best, what is the right thing to do. Now, the government estimates to generate a certain amount of money at the end of the year, maybe from taxes, maybe from business dealings, or maybe from grants, or even from loans. Yes, government borrows money, you know that. But the government is also looking at how they're going to spend the money. But if the government decides to generate 100 billion from the economy this year, and the government decides to spend that exact amount, the 100 billion, on the society this year, we call that a balanced budget. The budget is equal. That means, or it's kind of the revenue and the expenditure are actually equal. The budget is balanced. It's okay. Yes, like I said, economics is not about the word balanced, make it look so positive. Yes, it might not be good, it might still be good, or it might be good and might not be efficient. It's about what's the right thing to do at every time. Okay, so if a budget is not balanced, of course, you already know what the next one is. It has to be unbalanced. So that's the second type of budget. It can be either balanced or unbalanced. And unbalanced simply means that your revenues and your expenditure, your government spending are not the same. If they're not the same, then we call that what? Unbalanced budget. Now, this is where we're going to. Unbalanced budgets can be divided into two. It can be surplus budgets or it could be deficit budgets. Of course, surplus sounds positive again. It's surplus. Deficit sounds negative. It's like it's a minus. But in economics, we're not dealing with what's like positive or negative kind of, but what is efficient, what's the right thing to do. Now, let's start with the first one, surplus budgets. That simply means that you have more money you have more money unspent, because let's say the government plans to generate 100 billion from the economy. The government decides to spend less of that, like let's spend about 80 billion. So that means at the end of that fiscal year, the government still have 20 billion to save or 20 billion to keep for the next year. That is what we call surplus budget. There is a surplus, there's extra money available. Well, is that a good thing? It might be. But of course, bear this in mind. Most economists prefer to have surplus because they feel that is an indicator that the economy is doing well. Of course, as a human being, if you make 100,000, you still have 200,000 at the end of the month that is kept in your pocket, you feel like you're doing well because you're not borrowing more, you're not spending everything you earn. It sounds like you're becoming richer. And the more you have, the more you save over time, you can take care of your own expenses. That's one part. Now let's talk about a deficit budget, which is very common around this part of the world. Third world countries run deficit budgets and many other countries as well. But trust me, even developed countries sometimes run deficit budgets. So let's talk about deficit budget. This is when your revenues are less than your expenditure. This is talking about when the money the government makes this year or in a fiscal year is less than the money the government intends to spend. Now that brings us to one major question. How can you spend more than you're earning? Is that even positive? So the question is, how do you even finance all the things you're spending on? But before we talk about all these questions, because I know you have a lot of questions to ask me, but let's just take them one by one. Let's talk about a budget quickly. Now, when you're creating a budget, there's a pattern of how a budget is delivered to the economy or delivered to the society. Yes, there's an office we call the Budget Office of Federation, and which is Ben Akabueze is the Director General of that office. And that office is involved in the coalition of the budget of Nigeria. Now, based on my knowledge, the ministries in Nigeria, we have about 26 to 27, 28 ministries. I'm not so sure the exact figure, but the point is all ministries in Nigeria will gather their own individual budgets and send that to the Budget Office of the Federation. And when it gets to that place, it is collated, put together as one, and sent to the president. The president looks at this budget and reviews it. And if the president is okay with the budget, the president sends this budget to the Senate, presents it to the Senate. And the Senate looks at it and they vote on it and say, oh, the budget is okay, can be implemented, or they make some adjustments to it. Well, of course, you've heard several times when you've heard that the president has presented his budget at the Senate or to the legislators. So it's quite a common thing in our society for the president to present a budget. Because, of course, that's why I asked you the question from the start, who did you vote for? Whoever you voted for determines the budget of Nigeria. Okay, so now we've learned about Ben Akabueze. Let's talk about budget deficit again. That's kind of budget that sounds negative. So let's look at this budget again. What are the ways of financing this budget? Imagine you spend more than you're supposed to generate. You're spending more. Let's say the government is supposed to generate 100 billion this year, fiscal year, and the government is spending about 150 billion. Where's the other 50 billion going to come from? We'll answer that question later. But for now, we're asking that, how do we finance this? Okay, let's talk about this quickly. Number one is you can borrow more money. Simply borrow money from other countries. Of course, you as an individual can borrow money from your friends, but the government can also borrow money from their allies, borrow from other countries, or even borrow from organizations, IMF, borrow from World Bank, or even borrow internally from commercial banks through treasury bills and all those things. So another way the government can also finance this is by increasing taxation. Government generates a lot of money from taxes. So government can increase the volume of money they get from taxes. So let's say tax usually used to be 4%. Government can increase that to 8%, double the price or the tax rate, simply because they want to generate more money. So government can do this to get more money. Another one is reduce spending. Of course, if you have been spending money for a while and you realize that you're on deficit, you could reduce your spending. Government can reduce how much money they spend every time or in every fiscal year. So instead of spending like 100 billion this year, government can say, okay, you know what, because we already have a deficit, we have money we are owing to other countries, we can reduce how much we're spending this year. And if government does that, it means less roads, it means less schools, it means sometimes, in some cases, even lack of consistent payments to workers. That sounds negative, right? Okay, good. The next one is another way government can finance budget deficit is by having economic growth. Now, if the economy booms, if we have economic improvements, we have higher GDP rates, then we can take care of the expenses. I'll give an example of you. So let's talk about you. If your parents make more money, or if you make more money, what happens? You can cover all the loans you've taken. You can cover for all the deficits you have, all the debts you have incurred. So if you were owing, let's say somebody who is making about 100 million yearly, and the person has a spending of about 120 million yearly. So the person has a deficit of 20 million. So the person can cover that debt if the person can make more money. Simple logic, makes sense. Just make 150 million. With that, you can cover your 120 million deficits, and you can also still save for the next year. So when you make more money, what happens? You can cover your loans, you can cover your debts, and you can save more money, have a surplus budget. Well, that is not so easy to achieve when it comes to economy. It's not that easy. It's not like getting a new job. It's not like getting money from your parents. It takes a whole lot for the government to become richer. Okay, so let's look at the last one, talking about sale of government organizations or assets. Do you think the government should sell their organizations or sell their assets, sell their properties or their companies just to finance the debt? Of course, let's talk about you. If you are owing like 20 million to people and you have a good TV in your house and the TV is worth about 15 million, what do you think? Sell it and get a smaller TV and watch that. Or maybe you have a furniture that is expensive too, sell it. Or your mom have jewelry, sell it. So government can also do the same thing. They could also sell their organization, sell their properties, sell their assets to other countries or to multinational companies or to individuals or to anybody at all that's willing to buy. Now, talking about this, you have to be careful with this. It's not as if government is just going to say, oh, we're selling NIPOST, we're selling PHCN, or we're going to sell that organization, sell that ministry. No, that's not how it works. It's a different thing. It simply means that sometimes government have to deregulate, they have to privatize these organizations. Example, if your dad has a house and it's like a story building, just like a story building. So you guys live upstairs and downstairs. And your dad feels like he's running a deficit, is not having enough money. Of course, he can convert his apartment to be upstairs and just say, okay, everybody, let's just move upstairs and rent out the one downstairs, or even sell it to somebody completely and take care of his loans. Or maybe he has a building at the back of the house that is an extra building. Government can also give that out as a rent or even sell it off. So there are many other ways. There are many ways government can sell their assets. Government can actually just privatize the asset and just say, okay, you know what, this organization now belongs to these people, and they should buy it, and when the government gets money from that, the government does not need to spend money on that. The same way, if you have a generator that is taking much of the money, you can stop that. Very good. So, and that takes us to effects of budget deficits. What are the effects of budget deficit? When you have a deficit, what are the effects of that? The number one effect of that is that you are going to have to rely on foreign economies. Nigeria is relying on a lot of economies right now. We're relying on maybe China. I'm just saying this for myself. We're relying on America because at some point we must have borrowed money from these economies. I don't have any fact to back that up, but Nigeria is also owing because we know we have national debt. So you might also have economic uncertainty, which means that you're not sure what's going to happen tomorrow. Because you're owing money to a lot of countries, you have a lot of loans, a lot of deficit, which doesn't sound so positive. You're not so sure about what's going to happen because you might incur more debts, you might run into more problems. And the next one is currency devaluation. Yes, our currency will be devaluated if we are having so much deficit, so much money in our circle, in our economy, and some of this money are not even ours, it's given to other countries. Then another one is future tax burdens. Government might have to tax more people, tax more organizations just to raise money so that we can take care of our loans, our deficits. And the last one that we're going to talk about is inflation. And that consequence of budget deficit is inflation. More money in circulation, prices begin to increase. So these are just examples of the consequences of budget deficit. So next time you hear that the government is about to present a budget to the Senate or the president is about to implement a new budget, you must be concerned about if it's a surplus or a deficit. And if it's a deficit, it has major consequences. But it's not really a completely bad thing because it has its own advantages too. Because government do that because they might need help temporarily, then later they can take care of themselves. Your dad might take a loan from the bank against his income because he needs help now, but he might be able to take care of that loan later. So it's not completely bad. Government can also do that to create more jobs. When the government borrows money, they can spend that on roads, on infrastructure, on schools, on employing more people. And when they employ more people, what happens? The economy booms. The things get better. We make more money and we improve. So that explains the concept of budget. So we understand what budget is. So let me just do a recap quickly. A budget is an estimate of all expenses, spending of government, and revenue, income generated by the government. It could be balanced and it could be unbalanced. If it's balanced, revenues and expenditures are the same. If it's unbalanced, it simply means revenues are less than expenditure or revenues are more than expenditure. But if it's balanced, if it's unbalanced rather, and it's a surplus, revenues are more than expenditure. But if it is a deficit, it simply means that expenditures are, of course, more than revenues. And now, is a budget deficit a positive thing? Yes, and also no. And is it a budget surplus? Is it also a positive thing? Yes, and also no. So if you understand this carefully, you understand that economics is not focused on whether the government should have a deficit or not. It's focused on which is the best alternative at each point. So I believe, for me, there's nothing wrong with a deficit budget. There's nothing wrong with the government borrowing money. The question is, can the government finance their loans over time? Will the government be able to pay back soon? Because if the government does not pay back soon, we have more debt incurred. We run the risk of running our economies in relying on other economies. We run the risk of accumulating more debts and not being able to grow or develop the way we should. So a budget deficit is not necessarily a bad thing, depending on the situation, and it's not necessarily a good thing, depending on the situation. But all economists will encourage you not to have a budget deficit because it has bad consequences. Okay, so I hope you've learned something in this session. In our next session, we'll talk about taxation, another fiscal policy that the government also runs, and which is also in tandem or in line with a budget. And you begin to understand how government make more money. Because today, in this session, we've talked about spending more than generating money. See you in the next session.